Should Britain send troops to Ukraine? That's what we're asking. Get your calls in for this one now. Former Armed Forces Minister James Heappey has said that the UK should definitely consider putting boots on the ground to offer support to Ukraine in the war against Russia.
You've got to be careful about how you do it. I think definitely nowhere near a combat zone. I think you've got to be very, very careful not to make it into a Russo-NATO war. But I do think it is worth exploring what, in the sort of deeper, in the depth of Ukraine, the donor community could do.
Maybe sort of British troops training, that kind of thing.
Well, I think it's worth considering.
Now, he also said that we should be ready for war and be willing to go even further with offering weapons to support our allies. Peter, I'm going to start with you on this one. Would you send boots on the ground to Ukraine?
I'm baffled by this story because we've been doing this for the last 2 years. There's been British troops out in Ukraine helping with training Ukrainian officers. And likewise, Ukrainian officers have been coming to the UK. There's been articles in the media about it. We've seen it. I don't know why Heappey was so desperate for some airtime or column inches that he had to reiterate what was blatantly obvious and what many of us knew. But yes, of course. In fact, I would have gone a lot further, though.
You would have gone a lot further already?
Undoubtedly. The day Putin and his murderous troops marched illegally into Ukraine, I would have gone, President Zelensky, there's a piece of paper, there's a pen, sign there, please, you're in NATO now. And then I'd have sent a NATO force to smash Putin's troops all the way back to Moscow and beyond.
What do you think, Jasmine?
I understand why it's important for us to make sure that, you know, Russia doesn't succeed in this war against Ukraine. But what I would say is, to me, it's never been about Russia heading west. It's always been about NATO and Ukraine heading east. And so you can see why Putin's threatened. I think the difference here about troops on the ground, and I agree with you, by the way, about this not being a new story, because Grant Shapps was talking about it last year. David Cameron's also mentioned that we shouldn't send troops in, actually, because it makes British troops a target for the Russians. But I'm more considerate of only if we are advocating for those who are advocating to go out to put these troops on the ground should send their kids out first. I think we should ask UK taxpayers what they would like to do, because I think we're in a very different world now from World War II and World War I. That was people-led war. This is now tech-led war. You can send drones in, you can do data-led tech, you can do so much more with technology than people can. I just don't understand why sending out British troops to train would make any positive difference.
I mean, you've definitely got a point there. It's more technology based, but we've also got nuclear weapons involved. And wouldn't Russia see it as an escalation if we actually put boots on the ground? Because as far as I'm aware, Ukrainian soldiers have come to Britain and have been trained up here, but I am unaware of troops being in Ukraine in any official capacity anyway.
Because we have such cowardly politicians, this has allowed this monster that Vladimir Putin is to essentially go about in his very autocratic way, trying to destabilise the West, destabilise the world, really, if you will, whether that be through illegal migration, through interfering with elections. He's an absolute autocrat. And the world is a place that's a lot worse off because of Vladimir Putin and not better off. So he has to be confronted, taken on robustly. And his threats of nuclear war and the such like, you threaten what you like, pal. You go invading other people's countries illegally, we're going to turn on you and we're going to send you packing right back from where you came from.
But do you think the British people would support... Apparently there are British troops actually in Ukraine, but very, very small number, and certainly, I'm presuming, not in the front line, which actually the MP is not suggesting that we do send troops onto the front line. But do you think the British public would support sending significant amounts of troops to Ukraine if it meant that we were a potential target for Russia? Well, we are a target, but an increased target.
Well, sadly, it doesn't matter what the public think because it's the elected politicians that make these decisions. If we rewind to Saddam Hussein's illegal invasion of Kuwait in 1990, 1991, we sent troops out there to assist Americans to repel that illegal invasion of a sovereign state.
Well, that's interesting that we were assisting Americans. Do you think that we would need, Jasmine, the help of America if we were going to do that, the help of allied forces before we went in? Because what good is Britain going to do on their own?
Well, exactly. I mean, I take issue with one of the things that you said there about Putin destabilising the West, when actually, if we're really self-aware about ourselves, and look, don't get me wrong, I'm a proud Brit. I'm born and bred here, but we have been destabilising the rest of the world, and that's why when we have colonisation and empires and we teach the rest of the world to speak English as their second language, and then they all make a beeline for our shores and we are up in arms going, immigrants are coming here, well, that's because we've helped destabilise the world. And look, England is a tiny little island, right? We don't even fit in one of the states in America. If we were the size of China, India, Russia, I would say yes, let's go out there and strong arm and push our weight around and help create world peace. But we're not. We're this tiny island and we don't have the same power and the manpower as we had many centuries ago. We've got to understand that policing the world is not our job. And the more we continue to strong arm our way into it, the more we destabilise those countries and the more we are targets. Let's focus on what's happening here.
Because of Britain's rich future, which included a lot of global influence, we've always punched above our weight in terms of the size of the nation and the population that we have. But that goes back decades because we had huge global influence. Yes, some of that was achieved by some pretty kind of suspicious means, shall we say?
Not suspicious, criminal and illegal.
If we're going back to the...
and immoral.
To the Crusades kind of era. But of course, you have to remember that we stood alone against the Nazis. And that gave us great...
Did we stand alone?
To start with, yes, we very much did. Yes,
but we didn't
absolutely
eventually,
did.
because
yes.
we are a tiny island.
I've let you talk.
Go ahead,
go
ahead. Go ahead, my bad, go ahead.
And so we've had global influence because of the courage that the nation's shown and because of the influence that it's had over the years. I think with regards to Putin, it was a missed opportunity for this nation to flex its muscles and show what a great nation it could be.
So you would have liked us to have led the way. Let's go to the calls on this. Jed from Swansea, what's your thoughts? Would you like to see British troops in Ukraine?
Yes, I would. And I think they should have backup like they would if they were in this country, because otherwise the troops are going in, the same Ukraine troops, that no backup whatsoever, and the poor persons are being killed without the backup they should have. You know, we got drones, we got planes, we got everything that stopped the Russians from killing our troops.
So you're saying you would like them to have the backing of NATO, essentially? So that kind of that goes along the lines of, you know, immediately when the war started, we should have had them sign up to NATO, and that would have given us full right, I suppose, to go in there and defend Ukraine alongside them.
Yeah, well, NATO may have defended them, but we need to go in. We're giving them guns and things like that. We may as well go in and use our own guns.
Do you not think that would make us a target?
Our troops, pardon?
If we do that on our own, would that not make us a very obvious target for Putin?
Well, hopefully, if we go in, everybody else will follow us.
It's a big hope, though, Jed, isn't it?
Troops out of there. Well, not really, because our fighting force is one of the best fighting forces in the world.
Still.
And there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, we've got the smallest armed forces since the Napoleonic times, Jed. I'm not sure they are what they used to be.
Well, we may have the smallest force, but it fights well above its weight.
Well, okay, that's what Peter says. We punch above our weight when it comes to our impact with the armed forces. Does that give you any sort of reassurance, Jasmine, at all?
No, what I would ask you both, actually, as parents is, would you send your own children out there?
Undoubtedly. In fact, our youngest son is going through the army officer application process at the moment.
OK. Well, I think the art of war has changed greatly. And I think what I would ask all of you, including Jed and the viewers, is think about what happens when a war finishes. When a war ends, there's ceasefire, conversations, communication and negotiation. Why are we not trying to get to diplomacy rather than doing all of the war and the fighting and the weapons and the deaths of the human beings that are unnecessary?
Name me one person that has successfully used diplomacy with Vladimir Putin?
North Korea.
There you go, you see. You answered my point entirely. He's an absolute despot.
But do you not think the
he's
art
a
of
despot
war has
and he's a bully.
changed?
He's a despot and he's a bully, and people need to stand up to him.
OK. We'll go back to the calls. Michael from Northampton, what's your views on this?
I think we should send the troops in tomorrow.
Tomorrow? On our own, just Britain on its own, not with the backing of NATO, not with America?
Listen, we're like the gentleman on your panel says,
Peter?
we're the greatest fighting force in the world.
Yeah, we hear that quite a lot. I'm not sure that's how, high-ranking officers in the armed forces feel anymore. They're forever asking for us to be recruiting more armed forces. We have a recruitment issue when it comes to the army. Nobody seems to want to join it.
If it comes to the crunch, the boys join the army.
Boys and girls, presumably, Michael, nowadays it would be boys and girls. Would you be happy with your family members joining the army and going out and fighting in Ukraine?
Yes, I would. My sons would go tomorrow if I had to.
We're hearing lots of people very for sending troops to Ukraine. But you said an interesting thing earlier, Jasmine, when you were referring to the fact that actually we look at this as Russia trying to encroach on the West, but actually what we've been doing is trying to encroach on Russia. Do you think then that if Putin manages to entirely take over Ukraine, that he would stop there? He wouldn't try and enter any of the other countries around it?
Listen, the people who lead countries are often power-hungry megalomaniacs. They're completely out of control with their power. But Putin, every time he's been asked about this war, has said repeatedly, nothing would have happened, but NATO has been trying to come east, and now you're coming more into my territory when you agreed not 2 years ago. If they had an agreement and Putin had stuck to it, then that's what NATO and Ukraine should have stuck to. Why are we it's like prodding a bear, isn't it? It's like going, we're going to keep getting closer to you. And why are we doing it?
I don't know, and I don't know who's right in this. It's not my job to say, but, you could argue that actually Ukraine wanted to join NATO. NATO didn't invite Ukraine. So the countries that border Russia were always terrified that Russia was going to then come and invade them. And so over time, each one has wanted to join NATO as a form of protection.
Of course, but when you made that agreement many decades ago with Putin and Russia, you had to agree, you should have stuck to it, because otherwise what you're doing is you're threatening him and his security. And in any argument, whether this is two children or two world leaders, you always say, hold on, what would the other side say? Try and see it from both sides.
I've never heard such a pile of pro-Moscow Putin
I am not pro-Moscow.
in a very, very long time.
I am pro not having our own citizens go out and be targets.
I was in Poland just a few weeks ago, and the Polish people that I spoke to, and I spoke to many of them, are living in constant dread of Putin's incursion into Poland. They think they're going to be next. That's what bullies do. If you don't stand up to them and you don't stop them, they'll keep on taking liberties.
And do you think there are countries around the world that say that about the UK?
I'm not sure that we've got troops deployed in an illegal invasion of any country anywhere at the moment.
At the moment being the operative phrase.
But of course, if Putin does take it further and ends up
actually at the moment might not be the operative phrase, because I bet there are. But go ahead.
Into Poland, then of course that will instigate NATO to take a position on this and get involved. Aziz from Southampton, what's your thoughts on troops in Ukraine? Does it make us a target?
Well, whatever. But the thing is, it'll completely vindicate what Putin has been saying all the time about NATO, by us sending troops. It'll completely prove his point. And secondly, I'd like to say to this ex-policeman about Putin illegally going into Ukraine. We've been doing that all the time. We've illegally invaded Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. I mean, we got a long record of that. How many countries has Putin actually, apart from Ukraine, gone and invaded?
I completely agree. I think I was completely against the Iraq war. But that goes back to what I was saying earlier about it's not what the people want, it's what the politicians do. That's what armies are trained to do. They follow the instructions of the politicians. I remember there was well over 500,000 people took to the streets of London to protest against the Iraq war. And look where that got us. Unfortunately, nowhere, but look where the actual invasion of Iraq got us.
Do you not think, though, Peter, there would be protests if we decided to send significant numbers of troops to Ukraine as well?
There might be, but it's a very different kettle of fish from the Middle East, which we ourselves have destabilised so dramatically through a ridiculous invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and the such like. We've completely destabilised that part of the world. I think Eastern Europe, Ukraine, repelling Putin's troops back into Russia, I think, would be a very different kettle of fish.
Aziz, thank you very much for your call. Julian from London, what's your thoughts? What stance should we take when it comes to Ukraine? How much help do we offer?
Hi, Strom.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, well, I think, yes, we should send troops there. I mean, they started this war on Ukraine, first saying they weren't going to do anything, and then they soon went ahead and attacked. And the way they've been treating some of the inhabitants of that country, the Russians, it's dreadful. I mean, they've been raping women in front of their children.
There's been definite accusations of war crimes. I mean, I think they're being investigated as we speak. But yes, you're absolutely right, Julian. So you think on that reason alone we should step in and defend the country that's being attacked?
Well, that reason also they're doing it to girls in front of their parents, and they've been torturing apparently as well.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to get into details of the horrible things that are happening, Julian, because it's not a very nice time of day to be getting into that. But I appreciate that it is absolutely horrendous. But is it our war?
That is the reason in itself, because I mean, Ukrainians they didn't start it, did they? And I don't know who's coming off worse, but I think if we could send in troops, and other countries could send in troops, it might help to bring this conflict to an end, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, it could, Julian, it could. But another thing could happen. No other countries join us and we're out there on our own with Ukraine. I don't think...
Even worse, bigger countries align with Russia, as we've already seen a lot of the big powers are now starting to align with... Yes, and then it becomes World War III, and now we're in a real situation.
Julian, thank you for your call, though. Rob from Cumbria, what's your view on sending troops to Ukraine? Would you be for that?
No, I'm totally against that. I listen to these people who want to go gung-ho into wars and whatever else and send troops in to fight and whatever else. People need to realise that the UK isn't the military power that it was 100 years ago. We have a perfect example with Afghanistan. When the Americans decided to pull out, Britain was left scrambling to get away. We couldn't stay in Afghanistan by ourselves. We just have to look at question marks over are we a nuclear superpower. The last couple of tridents we tried to test fire have went wrong. Britain is not. They would struggle. Britain at the minute, because the armed forces have been diminished, would struggle to stop a squabble in the playground. So to police the world is not the UK's job. We shouldn't be dragged into proxy wars or anything like that.
Rob, I totally hear your point that our armed forces are somewhat diminished from our past, some people would consider it glories, but I'm not sure that the callers want to launch into war just gung-ho. They're seeing atrocities, they're seeing devastation, they're seeing unfairnesses on a really grand scale, and they think, Britain, we hope, is a moral, upstanding country. That's what we would hope, and that we should help out. We need to lend a helping hand. I mean, we are financially, we are with weapons, and we are with training for sure. But maybe we need to go a step further and really make a stance.
Well, history. I'll show you of recent history. When the UK goes in alone, look what happened in Libya. Look what happened. We weren't alone in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is in a worse position now than it was. Iraq, we've got a history of destabilising countries by trying to help. We can't sort everything out. We've got our own problems back here, and total sympathy with the Ukrainian people, but sometimes interfering with it makes things worse.
Well, so do you not think, what if NATO decided to get involved then?
If NATO gets involved, that's a complete different matter.
Okay.
If NATO decides it, we've signed agreement with NATO, so we'd have to act. That's an absolute complete different matter.
Okay, what if it was just America then? It wasn't NATO in its entirety. It was just we would have the backing of a larger army like America's.
Well, can we trust America to fulfil its promises and the plans to stabilise things? We've seen what happened in Afghanistan when the plane's taken off and all the people were left, people who helped the British and American services. You know what I mean? Some of them are still hiding now, apparently. So sometimes by interfering, you can make things worse.
Yeah, I think David Cameron's been speaking to them. But Rob, I totally take your point. Thank you very much for all your calls on this.